What an honor to be here. What an honor to be introduced by John Andrews. I run the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C. I run it. I mean, I have 206 bosses is what it comes down to, because it's a think tank, which is to say that it's not very organized in the traditional corporate sense. But when you run a think tank in Washington, D.C., you have to be thankful for the people around the country that are doing the true work for the freedom movement. And there's nobody more than John who's doing that. This is the biggest star in the local think tank entrepreneurship world that you have. How many think tanks have you started? 5?
I've worked for 5, and several have even succeeded.
Yeah, I mean, this is, before I took over AEI, everybody knows who John is, and it's with real gratitude that I take every opportunity I can to work with him. An honor to be with you. You are the reason that our movement succeeds. The truth of the matter is, if it's not for the energy of people who do what they do for the love of our country, we are going to go the direction of European-style social democracies. I don't have to give you the evidence on that. You know it's true. What I'm going to talk to you today about is how we can make our case better, because I'm going to start with a fundamental proposition, and that is our message is not getting across. We can yell louder. We can look madder. We can give people more data. It's not going to work. You know that we're in the middle of an exercise in futility if we think that shouting louder is suddenly going to get the point across. We don't need a fundamental change in values. On the contrary, our values are correct. Our worldview is right, but we need to talk differently. And what I'm going to tell you today, and the punchline of what I'm going to tell you, what I'm going to submit to you for your consideration, is not even that we have to talk differently to convince others who don't agree with us. No. We have to talk differently to reveal our own values to ourselves, to make ourselves into a morally magnetic movement. We have to talk in the way that shows that we are willing to fight for people more than the other guys. We have to show what's written on our hearts to ourselves. Until we do that, we're not going to succeed in our message, and people are simply not going to be drawn to us. That's what I hope to share with you today, and I'll look forward to your comments on whether or not you agree with the comments that I have. Now, I talk to a lot of Republican politicians. I talk to Democratic politicians sometimes too, but I generally talk to Republican politicians. Those are the ones who are hanging around AEI, looking for advice, looking for policy advice, looking for communications advice, looking for anything that's going to improve their position in the political marketplace. And the question is always, what have we done wrong? Right? Now, here's basically it in a nutshell. This is an old story that some of you have heard, so bear with me if you have. This is a story of 3 best friends. The 3 best friends go out and golf every Saturday morning. They get out at 8 a.m. every Saturday morning. They love it. They look forward to it all week. They have a special dispensation from their wives. They get out for 4 hours every Saturday morning. They've been doing it for 15 years. One's a priest, one's a psychologist, and one, like you or me, is a free market economist. Okay, now they get out this one beautiful Saturday morning in August, and the first thing that happens is they get stuck behind the slowest twosome they've ever met. This twosome is just, it's awful. They're 4-putting every green. It takes them 5 minutes to select a club, even though they have a caddy, so it should be going fast, but it's actually going slower, inexplicably. And 3 holes go by, and they start making remarks just loud enough to hear. You know, they say, you know, the priest, he says, I pray to Mary that I never get stuck behind a twosome this slow ever again. Right? Nothing. Okay? 2 more holes go by, and they say, this is done. They march up to the caddy, and they say, you got to let us play through. Do you see how rude this is? This is the slowest we've ever seen anybody play. Come on. Give us a break. The caddy says, you can play through if you want, but do you realize how rude you've been? Do you know who these guys are? And they say, no, who are these guys? He said, do you remember last year when the town orphanage burned down? Said, yeah. Do you remember the 2 firefighters who pulled all the orphans out of the blaze heroically, but in the course of the fire, they lost their sight? The 3 friends say, you're kidding me, it's not. I say, yeah. The caddy says, yeah, it's the heroes, it's the firefighters. Golfing was their passion. Obviously, it goes a lot slower now, but maybe a little respect. Now, the 3 friends are mortified, as any of us would be. The psychologist says, you know, I think this is actually an important learning opportunity for me. I've dedicated my life to helping people, and now insensitively I display my complete lack of understanding. I'm going to use this as an opportunity to become a better psychologist. The priest, he says, Oh, that's right. This is a great opportunity. I have a contrite heart, and I thank the Lord for that. The free market economist, he thinks about it. Finally, he says, you know what? It would be more economically efficient if they played at night. That's what people think of us. That's what people think our values are. Now, I know it's not right. I know it's not fair. But that's what people think of it. How do I know that? You look at the election results in November. That frustrating election, none of you was popping champagne corks that night, I bet. What did we see from that? 3 questions on every exit poll. Who had better ideas? Who had better leadership? Who cares more about people like me? Romney won handily on ideas and on leadership. He lost, who cares more about people like me? 80-20. That's what people think. You can say they're stupid all you want, but that's not going to help. The problem is that people don't understand what's on your hearts about what you're trying to do. That's what we need to change. Okay, now, a little fun fact. How long, and this is going to explain the title of my presentation today, how long does it take people to figure you out? Somebody doesn't know you. You're in a debate, you're giving a speech, you're having a conversation, whatever. How long does it take people to figure out you? The answer is 7 seconds. People will assess who you are and what your message is all about. They'll sum you up. They'll put you in a frame in 7 seconds. Now, you can control it or you can not control it. You can let circumstances or the weather control it. You can let what somebody else is eating for lunch control what they think of you, or you can control it. What are you going to do? The answer is, if you want to win, you better be in charge of your 7 seconds. So I'm going to do an hour about 7 seconds. And I want, if I do my job, you're going to be thinking for the rest of the week about your 7 seconds. Because that's when you win it or when you lose it. And it's not just people who hate us who are framing you. It's people who love us who are framing you right. You're leaders. You're out there and you're in the public square. You're making the arguments. You're on TV. You're talking in town hall meetings. You're trying to convince your neighbors. Even the people who agree with us, they're listening to you because you're leaders, and they're learning in your 7 seconds about what they should say. That's the stakes. That's what we're talking about here. So what are we going to do with our 7 seconds? Let's talk a little bit first about business, okay? And we'll get back to actually what you say in your 7 seconds and how you sum it up. Let's start with this. Now, you all have computers, and some of you are Mac people, and some of you are PC people, right? Those of you who are Mac people think that PC people have something wrong with them, and they're conventional, and they're just not with it. I know you. I mean, don't try to lie to me. I know that that's how you Mac people think, right? I have them in my family. I've lived among them, and I know how this whole thing works. So, why is that? What's the deal? Let's think a little bit about basic marketing and how the PC market has evolved. If you talk to somebody from the world of Dell, which I've done many times, and they're terrific people and they have terrific products. If you talk to somebody from the world of Dell, tell me about Dell Computer. They'll tell you about what they do. We make great products. We have an incredible distribution system. We employ the most creative engineers, and we really take customer satisfaction seriously. That's what they'll tell you, right? All true and all to the good. It's all what they do. Now, I had the privilege recently of sitting down for 2 hours with Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple Computer. That's the worst job in America following Steve Jobs, right? That's hell, following Steve Jobs. But as the aspirational leader, as the architect, as the visionary. But if you talk to Tim Cook about Apple Computer, he doesn't tell you what they do because he doesn't know what they're going to do next. He's completely agnostic on the what. He talks to you about the why. He says, we rip up the status quo. We think different. He actually talks that way one-on-one when you talk to Tim Cook. It's unbelievable. And what's the result of that? The what is totally undefined. What do? The answer is everything. They do music players, they do tablets, they make phones, they make computers. What's next? The iWatch, the iWife? What's next? We don't know what's going to come from the mind of Apple Computer. Why? Not because they have better engineers, not because they have necessarily better ideas, but because they're about the why of their company. Dell struggles because it's stuck on the what, and the why is implied. The why is shareholder value. The why is trying to do what we've always done better. If you start with the why, the what is flexible. What do we learn from that? Well, we learn from that the general principle, the conventional argument that products first lead to an inferior purpose that's implied. The superior argument is you start with purpose, and that leads to products. I was over at the Aspen Institute just a minute ago, and in the question and answer period, I told a personal story about what has inspired me. John didn't tell you that I spent most of the first part of my adult life as a professional musician. I was a French horn player for the first 12 years of my career. I didn't go to college. I dropped out of college, or or kicked out, or something. And I went on the road for 10 years as a player. And I love music. I've wound up in the Barcelona Symphony for a bunch of years. And my favorite composer is the same as a bunch of you, if you know classical music. It's Johann Sebastian Bach. Probably the greatest composer who's ever lived. Now, I admired Bach for a bunch of different reasons, but I learned something about the why of Bach somewhere along the line that I found really inspirational. Right? Bach was out. He was incredibly fruitful. He had these cantatas that would fall off his pen. For every year in the church calendar, he had over 100 of these beautiful, unbelievable, masterful cantatas, mixing choral music with orchestra, and they just fell off his pen. How does that happen? At the same time, he had 20 kids. That's productive, right? And Bach was asked late in his life, why do you write music? Well, what a weird question, right? Why do you write music? Now, if you ask most composers, why do you write music? They say, because it's my job. Because that's what I learned how to do in conservatory. That's what I grew up doing, because I got to pay the rent. Why do you write music? What do you mean, why do I write music? Bach had an answer, and it came from Luke chapter 10, verse 27. He said, I write, because he was a serious Lutheran. He was serious about his Christian faith. Bach said, I write music for the glory of God and the enjoyment of man. That's what he said. It was still recorded today. And I heard that and I thought, I want that to be me. I want that to be Arthur Brooks. I want, when people say, why do you write books? Why do you manage the American Enterprise Institute? I want actually to believe in my heart that the reason is for the good of man and the glory of God. That's what I want it to be. Why is that so attractive to me? The answer is because it's mission, it's purpose. It starts with purpose. If I can start every day and I say, what I'm going to do today is for the good of others and the glory of God, and I actually believe it, then the products will make themselves. I honestly believe that to be the case. That's the superior argument. Starts with mission, and then it goes on to the what. It starts with purpose, and then it goes on to the product. Let's take this from the divine down to the level of the prosaic for a minute. Let's go from, and when I say divine, I mean God, not Apple computer. Let's take this to the level of politics, okay? Let's look at the last couple of presidential elections, and let's see who was doing what, okay? President Obama's magic. President Obama is an iPad. President Obama is Apple computer, whether we like it or not. Let's give credit where credit's due. We're really bad at that on the right, about giving credit where credit's due, right? Because everybody, humans, are really bad at that. But let's explain why he's successful. You can't deny the fact that he's tremendously successful with people, including a lot of people who we like and our family members, and people who are really smart, and people who don't hate America. He's being successful. What's the magic? And the magic is he's a purpose-driven politician. He's Bach. He's Tim Cook. He's Apple Computer. Why? When you talk about, in the last two presidential campaigns, what is the campaign about? What is the Obama phenomenon about? You know the words. It's hope and change. That is, as far as Bach was concerned, his version of the glory of God and the good of man. Hope and change. He didn't say what the Republicans have said over the past two presidential elections. What are we about? Good, solid, conservative policies that are going to bring this country back, right? When you talk to Republican politicians, in the last two presidential campaigns at least, and incidentally, there are a lot of people on the right who've gotten this right at the state and local level, which is why we have 30 Republican governors and a historically high level of state legislators from the Republican Party, many of whom are really visionary types. So I don't mean to cast aspersions on the party as a whole. On the contrary, the grassroots are quite healthy in particular places. But at the national level, you listen to Republicans, they're all about the what. They're all about the product. You know, what are we all about? We're all about tax reform. We're all about cutting spending. We're all about limiting government. I'm totally down with that stuff. I'm a militant on those things, and so are you, right? But that's what. Where's the why? The why becomes implied from the Republican Party at the national level. The why is never stated, and so therefore it's assumed. And what is it? It's to win an election. Apparently. At least it's not defined. 7 seconds have passed, and nobody's talked about the why. You talk about Obama, it's all hope and change. Implied is a movement, not a campaign or an election. Now, how do you get it done? Terrible things. You know, redistribution, social democracy, hurting poor people. Basically, we all know that, but this is what people are hearing. That's the magic. Now, let's take it to the level of the movement. Let's take it to the level of the conservative movement, right versus left today. The right starts with product as a general principle. Policies to limit government, curb wasteful spending, lower barriers to economic growth. These are laudatory goals. These are important products. These are the things that bring America back. We know it's true. Hugely important. But if you start with these things, your purpose is implied. Your purpose, your mission, is fighting against things. Do you want your purpose to be fighting against things? Think about an argument that you've recently witnessed or you've been part of. Virtually every argument between impassioned interlocutors has a winning side and a losing side. And if you watch carefully, you'll notice that the winning side is not fighting against things. That's the losing side. The winning side is fighting for people. You can fight for people, you can fight against things. You can also fight against people, for that matter. That's even worse. But if you want to win, don't be the guy who's fighting against things. Be the guy who's fighting for people. Just watch. Next time you'll see the empirical veracity of what I'm talking about here. When we start with product, our purpose is implied, which is fight against things. Bad things to be sure, but fighting against things. What are they all about? They fight for people. Just listen to them. Now, again, peace. I know it's not working. I know it's BS. I know they're not helping poor people. I know they're setting our country back, and ultimately it's hypocritical and it's ill-founded. We agree on that. But that's not my point. My point is what they state is a purpose of fighting for people. And a lot of people on the left, including everybody in my family, honestly believe it's true, and they're smart and they're good people. Okay? So stipulate to that. They think they're fighting for people. The product, which is implied, is a bunch of other stuff, taking from one group, giving to another, etc. But if you're out there today, if you're a person who's struggling in the wake of the financial crisis, what do you want to hear? Think about what people are experiencing today. You know a lot of people in the bottom half, I assume. I started out in the bottom half. I started the 25th income percentile as a kid. A lot of you people did too. Nothing wrong with that. Lower middle class, that's normal. 25% of the population is lower than that, right? If you're at the 25th percentile, what are you experiencing? Here are the facts. 15% unemployment, falling purchasing power for your family every year for 6 years, and economic growth and mobility that's lower than it was in 1980. 1/3 lower. Economic mobility has fallen by 1/3 for people in the bottom half, for actually people in the bottom quintile, by 1/3 since 1980. Extraordinary stuff. Think about it. So times are really tough for people in the bottom half. Who are you going to listen to? Are you going to listen to the side that was tarred with the whole notion that the 47% will never vote for the Republicans anyway because they just want their welfare? You know it's not true, that the whole bottom half is just a bunch of takers. You know they would prefer, most of them would prefer their kids to see them earning a living as opposed to see them cashing a welfare check. Let's be honest with ourselves. It's not true anytime something comes out of our mouth that the bottom half are a bunch of moochers. It's not true that that's what they want. So, if we're not in the business of fighting for people, we're in the business of fighting against things, guess where the bottom half is going to go. Guess how they're going to answer the question, who cares more about people like you? It all adds up. It's basic math. There's nothing more than arithmetic in the stuff that I've told you today. And we have to face these facts. The real question is not whether that's right. The question is, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to fix that? And that's our purpose here. Here's the reason, incidentally, that if you ask Americans, who they like politically, the answer is nobody. Hate them all, throw them all out. They're all scoundrels. Politics is awful business. I wish Washington didn't exist. I mean, that's the basic zeitgeist in America today. Why? It's pretty easy to figure this one out. They like our products. They hate our purpose. They like their purpose, but hate their products. That's the basic mismatch that's going on in American politics today. They like our products fine. 70% of Americans agree with your basic ideas with respect to the size and scope of government. But they hate the implied purpose that we have of fighting against stuff, because they think it's actually fighting against them. They like Obama's purpose, but they hate the direction that the country is going in. That's what we see in the public opinion polls today. This is the Gallup poll that shows the favorability of the two parties. Secular decline. They hate everybody, is what it comes down to, right? I mean, Republicans hate seeing this. They think, this is impossible. I mean, Obama's killing our country. The country's getting worse. Everybody knows it's true. So why don't they like us anymore? The reason is because we have a lousy purpose and they have a lousy product. So how do you fix it? What do we do? The answer is simple. We need our product and their purpose. We need to steal their purpose. You know why? Because it's actually our purpose. Every single one of us wants to fight for people. I know you're in the movement for the same reason that I am. It's not against the fight against budget deficits. That's just a number in a ledger. And you know that we're a rich country and we can actually go on for a long time. The reason that we care about those numbers in the ledger is the people who are getting hurt by that, and the people who are going to get hurt by that. The generations that are to come, my kids and grandkids, who are seeing the ladder pulled up behind us. Not right, not fair. The people who started out like I did, at just the good old 25th percentile, who are never going to be able to get ahead, who are going to stay on their parents' insurance till they're 26, who are not going to be able to find a job, who are going to not be able to pay for college, and if they do, it'll be on loans, and they're going to come out $125,000 in debt and have to work retail. That's Obama's America, and I want to fight for everybody, whether they vote for us or not. And I know you do too. We're in the business of fighting for people, so we got to stop talking about fighting against things, at least in our 7 seconds. We need their purpose and our product, meaning that we fight for people, and stop fighting against things as our opening bid. That's the 7-second philosophy. Now, you're going to ask yourself, what if they're still listening? Okay, so in other words, and it's this simple. We've done studies on this. There's a lot of work on this. It's called cognitive framing, if you want to Google it. And it basically says in the 7 seconds, since you've only got a few seconds, you basically just have to say what you're all about. Say, why are you in the movement? Because I want to fight for people who are too weak to be here fighting for themselves. That took about 7 seconds. You don't have time for facts. You don't have time for numbers. You don't have time for quoting Hayek. You can't bring up Milton Friedman. You just have to say, I'm here to fight for people who can't fight for themselves because it's not right what's happening in this country. You just said you're a fighter for people. That's your 7 seconds. Now, what if they're still listening? You better be able to back it up. What do you mean you're fighting for people? What does it mean to fight for people? Here's where it really gets interesting. Here's where we get to bring in the social science. As you know, I'm the president of AEI. We have 60 full-time scholars. These are the smartest people I've ever met. These are my intellectual heroes. Charles Murray. Peter Wallison is here. Frida Wallison is here. Peter's probably not here, right? Peter Wallison's been a scholar at AEI for a while. I love these guys. They have the ideas, right? The thrill about being the president of AEI is that we actually get to work up the next part of what I'm about to talk to you about, which is why we fight for people. And this is based on brain science and social psychology. Okay? This is how it really can work for our movement. I have this friend. His name is Jonathan Haidt. Some of you have heard him speak or you've read his book. His latest book is a big bestseller last year. It's called The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Disagree About Politics and Religion. He's a great social scientist. He teaches at NYU Stern School of Business. He's not one of us. He's an atheist and he's a leftist. But he's an honest social scientist who goes where the data take him. I love that. I love that. Now, why he's not one of us is a complete mystery to me. But it's true. And he has spent the last 10 years becoming the world's leading expert on the brain science of moral messaging, of morality, effectively. How morals change your brain. And he had this research question 10 years ago. Very interesting question, which he says, you know, everybody all parents are worried that if they send their kids to college, their kids are going to become moral relativists. Because on college campuses, what they hear is that all morality is relative. You know, your morality, my morality, it's a free-for-all, right? And parents know that, kind of know that's not true, and they're really worried their kids are going to absorb that from evil college professors. I taught college for 10 years. It's true. So, and you know it's true. So he wanted to know, is it true that morality is all relative? He wanted an empirical, a statistical answer to the question of whether or not it's all relative. I love things like that because it's something that divides left and right, but it does lend itself to actual study. So what he did over 10 years is he interviewed 132,000 Americans. Right? Now, academia is great. I mean, you can get tenure doing anything. You can, stand on the street corner asking people about their morals for 10 years and make you a full professor, which they did in John's case. And what he found was pretty interesting. Your mother was right. Conservatives are right. It's not all relative. There are 5 morals. Okay? There are basically 5 moral pillars that people share. And here's where it gets really interesting. 2 of them are shared by 100% of the population. 3 of them are shared by about 30% of the population who happen to be political conservatives. So let me tell you about the 5 pillars and what they mean to us. First, the 2 that everybody shares. 2 things that everybody cares about morally are compassion for the weak and fairness. Now, compassion for those who are weaker than we are. You grew up, unless you were raised by a pack of wolves, you grew up understanding it's not right to hurt poor people. People who are weaker than you deserve special care and consideration. Matthew 25 instructs very clearly that as you did to the least of these, our brothers and sisters, you did unto me. Incidentally, same chapter talks about the parable of the talents, which means that opportunity and hard work and personal responsibility matter a lot too. But as you did to the least of these, our brothers and sisters, you did unto me. Everybody knows that. And it doesn't matter if you're a Christian, you can be a Jew, you can be a Muslim. Everybody understands that hurting poor people is wrong. That's the basic principle, moral principle of compassion toward the weak. Number 2 is fairness. Conservatives hate fairness. St. Milton Friedman said that it's not right to never talk about fairness because it's a subjectively defined concept. Milton Friedman was a genius and I'm not. But that's not good advice. Why? Because John Haidt shows us that 100% of the population cares about fairness. We are wired to care about fair play. Now, we define it differently than President Obama. What's fairness for President Obama? It's taking from rich people and giving it to others. It's taking from one and giving it to others. It's redistribution. What do 89% of Americans think fairness is? Rewarding hard work and personal responsibility and creating opportunity. I have the facts. I got the data on that. Your definition of fairness is America's definition of fairness. The reason that we've lost the fairness debate is because we never showed up. We gave fairness to Obama. 100% of Americans care about it. We left the most lethal rhetorical weapon sitting on the table in the 2012 election. Sitting on the table. We should have said, we have a fairness crisis in America. We should have attacked on fairness. That was his weak point. He completely cowed the right into not talking about it by talking about it first. Those millionaires and billionaires, they need to pay their fair share. How many times did you hear that? Like 1 billion times you heard that, right? That's what he was doing, is neutralizing the mainstream meritocratic understanding of fairness. 100% of Americans care about fairness. You want to make the moral case? You better do it because you're fighting for people, and you better fight for people or you're going to waste your 7 seconds. The 2 things you got to talk about are compassion for the vulnerable and fairness for all. Those are the 2. Now, what are the 30% moral principles that are shared almost exclusively by political conservatives? Number 1, respect for authority. Now, a lot of people respect authority, but the idea that somebody who's in a position of authority has a legitimate claim on your respect is a moral principle that's not shared by moderates and liberals. Loyalty to team and or country, patriotism, the idea that we have of saluting the flag because it's the right thing to do. We didn't even have a flag, and we said a pledge of allegiance to the flag because it was the right thing to do. Conservatives do that. Liberals and moderates don't understand that at a basic moral level. And the last is personal purity, especially around matters concerning sex. Let me go into a little bit more detail. Respect for authority. I do debate training sessions for members of Congress now. It's a huge privilege, and it's incredibly interesting, and we develop all sorts of interesting material. I mean, what I'm talking about today, I'm developing into a book right now. And you're helping me because I get to talk about it and you're going to give me feedback. It's wonderful. I do that with members of Congress too. And I was talking about this principle that conservatives have a visceral sense that morally people in authority deserve respect. And he said, I don't see exactly what you mean, right? I don't see that this big difference between conservatives and liberals. I said, okay, fine. I do a Rorschach test with politicians sometimes where I say, tell me the first thing that jumps into your head when I say blank. Okay, so I said, tell me the first thing that jumps into your head, Congressman, when I say flag burning. He says rock-ribbed right-winger. He says treason. Okay, so I called my brother, big liberal. Called my brother and I said, hey man, tell me the first thing that jumps into your head when I say flag burning. He says, inadvisable. There you have it. Loyalty to team or country. You know, something that we all think, it doesn't, I mean, we don't admit it, but we all think. We think that liberals are unpatriotic. We think that they don't really love their country. Now, sometimes people will come out with some hysterical, crazy book called, you know, Liberals Hate America or something, right? To try to sell a bunch of books. But basically that taps into this fear, this loathing that we have, because we think that liberals actually don't care about their country. Why is that? The answer is because we have a visceral sense of the correctness of patriotism and they don't share it. They're differently patriotic, if you want to be really politically correct about it. Right? Now, the thing that drove conservatives into a rage in 2008, more than sort of any other single small item, was when Obama refused to wear that flag lapel pin. Remember that? Oh man, it drove us crazy. See? Told you. Boy, that should indict him with the American public. That indicted him with 30% of the population that already thought that he didn't like America. The rest of the population, let me tell you, said, huh, it's a pin. What are you guys getting so wound around the axle for? That was because we have a different sense of the moral correctness of patriotism per se. The third is purity, especially around sexual matters. I don't know any liberals who bring up their daughters, teaching them to be as sexually promiscuous as possible. I actually don't know any who do that. But the sense that being sexually promiscuous is always and everywhere a violation of natural law, that's ours. That's our belief. That it's just not right to do certain things with your body. It's just indecent. You just don't do that kind of stuff. And we're really offended when we see examples of sexual licentiousness and sexual revolution. It really bugs us a lot. When I was talking to John Haidt, the guy I'm referencing a lot right now, he called my attention to a very common bumper sticker in San Francisco. And I go to San Francisco a lot. It's not a big right-wing bastion, but we have a lot of supporters there because they feel so under siege. You know, that we come out to in the AEI. You know, thank God I can actually say what I think. You know, and one of the bumper sticker he called my attention to is very common in San Francisco. It says, "Your body might be a temple, but mine's an amusement park." Right? It's it in a nutshell, right? I mean, they think that's normal. It's hey, it's all good, right? Or that's crazy. That's complete craziness. You can't do that. You can't talk about that. You can't even talk that way. It's indecent, right? So the result is that we see purity, authority, and loyalty in these profoundly moral terms, whereas the 100% zone is compassion and fairness, but we kick these things away. We say we give compassion toward the poor, we give fairness to the liberals. And we focus on these. And worst of all, we focus on something that has no moral content whatsoever. For liberals or conservatives or moderates, and that's money. You can get people to fight about money and argue about money and be really passionate about it, but it will have no moral salience for any measurable part of the population. The minute you talk about money, you've lost the moral argument. If you bring up the case of, the word money and business and commerce don't appear in the AEI mission statement. The reason is because we're a moral institution. That's the reason. We avoid it because it has no moral salience. It doesn't with you. It doesn't with Americans. Don't talk about it. What are the big three things that we talk about on the right? Patriotism, sex, and money. Well, guess what? We just lost the battle of moral arithmetic. We stayed in the 0 to 30% zone. Meanwhile, Obama and all his nonsense is in the 100% moral zone. That's what they're doing with their 7 seconds. Guess who wins? So, let's fix it. Let's start talking about how we should own the positions of care for the vulnerable. How we should be the ones who talk about fairness. Look, I know you care about these things, but talk about the stuff that really matters most to you. Ask yourself this. What do you care more about? Fighting for people who are weak? fighting for people who are vulnerable, a truly fair nation that we get to hand on to our kids and grandkids, or whether or not somebody wears a flag lapel pin. I know what you care more about. I know for a fact. So why are we talking about the stuff that matters less? They win when we do that. Stop losing. Now, incidentally, I want to take one little quick excursion about vulnerability, right? I keep saying vulnerable, vulnerable, vulnerable. You talk to people on the left about vulnerable, they'll talk about certain groups of poor people that they politically like, right? They won't talk about people in rural areas. No, they don't like, they're yucky. They're yucky poor people because they like shoot guns and drive four-wheelers and stuff that liberals don't like, right? They talk about certain groups of poor people, right? Now, who truly are vulnerable in this country? Think about vulnerability in this country. This is our secret weapon. You want to talk about vulnerability? What do these groups have in common? The groups behind me. Public school students, people of religious conscience, poor people, Israel. What do they have in common? They're vulnerable. And they have a moral debt. These are people and nations and organizations and ideas that deserve our special defense. Why? Because we're leaders, and because we have resources, and because we have time and energy, and because God has blessed us with a clear vision for what's right. That's the reason that they deserve our particular care and respect and protection, because they're truly vulnerable. We win with a truly full understanding of what vulnerability is all about. They have a narrow understanding of vulnerable. We have an amplified understanding of vulnerable, and this is a really big deal. Before you ever reject the idea of fighting for vulnerable people, remember that that's what wires you too. That's what gets you up and gets you crazy angry in the morning. So, how do you do it? How do you do it? I'm just going to give you a couple of quick examples. One of the, I talk to Republican politicians. I say, you know the problem with you guys? You know the reason you keep getting messed up by the press? You keep complaining about the liberal media and all that. And I know, they're really super liberal. They drive me crazy too. But the real problem is that Republican politicians have a stupid tendency to answer the questions that they're asked. Right? Right? I mean, it's crazy. You know, when I first took over AEI, I hadn't done a ton of TV. And I started going on TV, and I started noticing that these interviews weren't going very well, especially when I would go on sort of center-left media, you know, network TV. Until finally one of our scholars said, you know, here's your problem. You're answering the questions. You know, you go on TV, you own it. I mean, you're on TV, you know, what are they going to do? Yank you off because you're not answering the questions? Never answer the questions. Anything anybody asks you ever is an opportunity for you to talk about what you want to talk about, because you know what needs to be talked about to do the most good for the most people. In other words, learn to pivot. Memorize your 10 pivots. You know the 10 things they're going to ask you. You know the 3 things you want to talk about, right? Make sure that you know how to get from here to there, no matter what they talk about. Let me give you an example. I've heard this again and again and again. You go in front of I just gave a talk very similar to this to the Republicans on the House Budget Committee. Paul Ryan and I are working together on this thing, and the question was, what do we say when they say, why do you want to cut Medicare for seniors? Why do you want to throw Granny out in the snow, right? And it's always this loaded question. Why do you hate old people, right? Don't answer that question. What's the answer to that question? In general, why do you want entitlement reform? The reason you want entitlement reform is we know as a fact that if we don't reform entitlements, we will become insolvent. If we become insolvent, we will have austerity. If we have austerity, it will hammer the poor. And that's not right. We cannot stand for that. Not now, not ever. People who have this, on the right, with this fetish with austerity, oh, it's kind of good. It's kind of like penance. Right? You go into the confessional, and the priest says, you know, give me 10 billion Hail Marys. Right? That's, obviously you're not a big Catholic crowd here. That's austerity. You know, Catholics, and Republicans kind of like austerity because it kind of feels like we're atoning for our sins. Austerity, my friends, is bad. You won't pay if we have austerity. Your poor neighbors and brothers and sisters will pay if we have austerity. It's not a good thing, and it must be avoided, and we're responsible for making sure that our country does not go down that path. You can't say, look, fine. You want it? Fine. I'm not going to have to pay. That's irresponsible. It's immoral. The reason we have to reform entitlements, the only reason we have to reform entitlements in this country is to avoid insolvency, so we can avoid austerity, so that our poor brothers and sisters don't get hurt. That's what we have to talk about now and forever, because that's what matters. That's what the money, per se, is not what matters. What's your position on the deportation of defenseless grandmothers? That's always how and I know there's going to be a ton of different views in here about the immigration thing. So I want to talk about how we argue on immigration. I got strong views, you have strong views, that doesn't matter. The left is dining out right now on immigration on the right. Right? They think it's like a Gettysburg for us. And they say basically, when I talk to liberal people in the media, they always say, you guys, you got to get it all straightened out on the right. You have to figure it out. Are you more greedy or are you more racist? That's what you got to figure out, right? I'm like, wait, I don't like those alternatives, right? That's what they're doing to us right now. That's the wrong set of alternatives, obviously. What we need to work on when we're talking about immigration is the fact that respectfully we're trying to adjudicate between two fundamental moral values, which is fairness and compassion. Rule of law and sovereignty and borders are a question of basic fairness. On the other hand, nobody comes into this country because they want to sit at the public trough. They actually want, every study shows very clearly that people want to support their families and they're poor. That is a basic issue of compassion. We understand those two alternatives. The right has to have a respectful discussion among itself, adjudicating between two 100% moral values of compassion and fairness. I was describing this to a senator. He said, yeah, actually, it's really important that people see this argument on the right between these two values. I said, how come? He said, well, I learned a long time ago, as a parent, that the worst, most ill-adjusted kids are the ones who never see their parents fight. It's a good point, actually. If your kids never see you argue, they never see how people who are in love with each other can respectfully adjudicate a disagreement. They'll never see it happen, and they'll never learn to do it. Well, guess what America's watching? America's watching us. And if they can't see us disagree with each other, respectfully adjudicating the two moral values that everybody shares, we have lost the opportunity of the year to show people that we're a morally superior movement. It doesn't matter if you agree with me on immigration or you agree with somebody else on immigration. We must resolve this issue in this particular way, because if we don't, we missed the opportunity. Now, again, this is not a gimmick. 7 seconds. 7 seconds. We fight for people. Practice it. 2, how do we fight for people? Through compassion and fairness. 3, never talk about anything else. This is not a gimmick so that we can just win debates and bring over people over to our side. This is how we really feel. There's any study of social movements helps you understand the truth of the following statement. Social movements don't convert people who are unconverted. They convert the converted to greater lucidity about our own particular values. The letters of St. Paul to the early church. The letters of St. Paul to the early church, they were not about how to become better missionaries to people who were not converted to the early Church of Christianity. No. They were intended to tell people who are already converted how to lead better lives. Why? Because St. Paul understood that would create a magnetism around their movement and that would draw people in spontaneously. The same thing is true for all of us in the conservative movement today. If you join me in believing that we have the morally superior set of positions, that we have a transcendental understanding of the human condition, that we have the goods, if you understand that when we wake up, we have a better formula for helping more people, then you understand that doing this simply purifies what we're all about and reveals us to ourselves. This is no gimmick. This is really what we're all about, and this is how we win, because people will be drawn to us when we do it. Let me give you a quick sum, and I want to hear from you. Start every argument by saying you fight for people and identifying who you're fighting for. It's going to get tiresome, and it's going to get boring. But remember the old adage of marketing, that a message doesn't work until it becomes sticky. And the rule of thumb is that ideas don't become sticky until people have been exposed to them 6 times. Well, guess what? Until somebody hears you say, I fight for people, that's why I'm in the movement, especially people who can't fight for themselves, right? Until you say, I'm going to fight for you and your family, whether you vote for me or not, and actually mean it. Until you say, our movement, doesn't matter if people say we're crazy, doesn't matter if people say we're evil, doesn't matter if people say we're stupid, but if we have enough love and we have a conviction that what we're doing is to fight for people who are weaker than we are, we're in the right. If we can say those things and actually mean it, we're going to need to say it a whole bunch of times before people start to believe us. Every argument. 2, base every argument, if you get the time, in compassion and fairness. Don't waste your time on anything that matters less. 3, money is never more than instrumental. I've got a whole talk I give on materialism. I'm doing a big, at AEI, we have a big collaboration with the Dalai Lama. Crazy, right? I mean, we're just a bunch of right-wingers. What would he want to do with us? We're the only institution at the national level that's talking about the morality of free enterprise. The Dalai Lama called us to collaborate on this set of ideas. Crazy stuff, right? That's good. That's good. Steal their icons. Steal their messages. Steal how they reach other people's hearts. Don't talk about money. It's a waste of time. It's not what you care about most. And finally, practice, practice, practice until it becomes a habit. The first time I tried to do this, I saw the research, I wrote the papers, I couldn't do it. I ended up talking about, do you realize that our economy has created more billionaires than any other economy in the history of the world? Stop, stop, you're losing, I see myself losing. This takes tons and tons and tons of practice. Now, if you agree with me, if I've recommended this to your interest and you're convinced, you're the carriers of these ideas. Think what we can do in the next 5 years if we are the movement that fights better for people. You don't have to be a populist. You don't have to go back to George W. Bush's compassionate conservatism, which is a spending contest for big government. No. On the contrary, limited government is pro-people, right? Then you can finally say, I'm going to declare peace on the safety net, but only for the truly indigent, and mean it, and reform entitlements in the process, and understand the courage of your own moral convictions. This is actually what we can do. And if we do that, if we are the new age, if we're the clarity of moral thinking, if we're the conscience of this country, and not just the people who are angriest about it, the sky's the limit, and we're really going to start to win. And that starts, of course, with great patriots like you. God bless you.